Now, what about the word systemic? Well, it's not the same as systematic, which basically means methodical, planned, um, diligent, so forth and so on. It just vaguely means something about a system, but we're not sure what it is. A system, we pretty much know what that is, and it's a collection of parts that work together. And oh, by the way, it's very important not to make the fallacies of composition and decomposition, because the properties of a system are not the same as the properties of the parts. A car is a system, it is drivable. None of the parts of a car, like the steering wheel or the engine or the differential or what have you, are drivable. So the system of a car has a quality, maybe, called drivability, which at least we can understand what that means, even if we can't really pin that down. That's another finding of cognitive science and cognitive linguistics, is that we can understand something pretty well without being able to define it. And in fact, definitions are extremely misleading. So how does a brain put together the words systemic and the word um, racism, the word systemic and racism, and get some kind of an understanding of what that means? Well, let me first talk about the history and the ideology about systemic racism. Let's limit it to the United States. And of course, we had a long time ago, before the United States existed, we had indentured servitude, and then we had pure chattel slavery, and then we got rid of the chattel slavery, and they got rid of the slavery. It didn't help all that much because we got uh, slavery by imprisonment, and then we got Jim Crow, and we got the neoliberal period, and we had all sorts of lynchings in the 50s, and then we had the civil rights era. Note, by the way, that we do not call it the black civil rights era, and we do not call it the black civil rights matter era. This is very interesting, but beyond the scope of this video. It's certainly worth thinking about. So we had the civil rights era, and that really did get rid of a lot of bad stuff. It got rid of government enforced segregation. Um, it got rid of laws against miscegenation. It made it a lot easier for various people, including black people, to vote. Now, of course, the Supreme Court is getting rid of those advances. But for a while, we had some advances. We had a fairly good Supreme Court, but still not much improved for black people. And in the late 60s and early 70s, and people started figuring out why. And one of the ideas was, well, we seem to have gotten rid of a lot of this racism. So maybe there are things other than overt individual racism going on, and we should start looking at the systems. That is about the same time people started talking about critical race theory. And one of the, again, really terrible words that they use to describe that as intersectionalist. And that's pretty much the idea of the parts of a system intersecting and working off each other. And we should look at the connections rather than, this part of the system is bad or this person is racist. And what we get now, I think, is a lot of unnecessary argument between the right and the left, which boils down not necessarily to a disagreement, because we haven't even gotten to the point where the disagreement can be found or aired or talked about. And the reason is because, again, this is from cognitive science, your ideology, in fact, everything in your brain affects everything. It does not merely affect your opinions or your conclusions, but it affects the very way that you interpret words, especially compound words like systemic racism. What I think is happening, or at least what I see over and over and over and over again, is you have people on the right and people on the left, and they have different ideologies, sort of. And when their brains process the term systemic racism, they get two different, completely different interpretations, which are in fact completely opposite to each other. They're not even operating on the same page. They're like trains on two different tracks arguing about who's going faster. And until that problem is solved, we can't even get down to the nitty-gritty. We can't get down to any actual statements, any actual logic or reason. So let me explore what I think are the two different interpretations. Well, again, according to cognitive science, categories are not, they don't work like set theory. So, for example, a systemic racist, let's invent that term, is not a racist who is systemic or the intersection of the sets of all systemic things and all racist things. Let's use a much simpler example, one more like strawberry. Stepmother. Is that a mother who is a step? Is that a step that is a mother? Is that the intersection of all things that are steps with all things that are mothers? Is there, for example, like a mommy ladder who has a step as a baby and the step is going to grow up and grow more steps and eventually become a ladder? Probably not, though that's what the classical categorization ideas held by a lot of people, including Chomsky, that's the only thing the theory could do. But in cognitive linguistics, categories are formed by